That's right, it's time for another tier list of a board game shelf. What's up, everybody? My name is Nick Murphy. I'm one half of the Brothers Murph, and we're going to be doing another tier list of a board game shelf. In this case, this board game shelf right here, one of our higher ones. Well, not the highest one. The highest one's right up there. And we're going to be doing another tier list. If you know what a tier list is, it looks like this. Usually, things on the bottom of the tier list are worse. It goes D, C, B, A, and S tier. S tier is the highest. But we don't really have bad games, because why would we have games that we don't like? And so we kind of changed the list where the lowest one is, it's fine, because they're always at least fine. And then it's good little game, great game, banger, and Dum Dum Fuego Fire. Because Dum Dum Fuego Fire games are just, they're just dumb good. They're just stupid good. So let's go ahead and get right into it. And we're going to be first talking about, oh gosh, can I get it? Go back loop, come forward, Dungeon Pets. Oh, nailed it, first try. We're gonna talk about Dungeon Pets. Dungeon Pets was one of the first kind of hobby board games that we got, which was a mistake, because this game's pretty darn heavy and is a bad choice for a first one. But we were so, or particularly me, because Mike didn't really know much about board games at this point. I was kind of the one who did all the research about board games, and I would buy them and then play them with him. And this game is so good and is so fun, and the theme is still to this day probably my favorite theme, or one of my favorite themes in all board games. And this is a game where you are you're monster pet owners, or monster pet shop owners. You are running pet shops for monsters, and you have dungeon lords coming into town who are gonna want cool, crazy, scary, big teeth, kind of crazy pets. And you are like, ooh, there's a market in this. Let's start our own little pet store. We'll raise these monster pets and sell them to dungeon lords. And that's what you're doing. So you are going around getting these different pets, which are these little egg shapes right here, and you are putting them in your pet shop, and you are raising them, and they have certain needs that you're going to be constantly need to fulfilling. And then throughout the game, dungeon lords will be coming into town, and those dungeon lords are going to want specific things in their pets. So if it's like a big mean dungeon lord, they might want like a super aggressive pet, just like one that's like tearing stuff up and got big old teeth and like super mad all the time, because that's what that dungeon lord wants. So then you kind of want to raise that pet to be that. There's some other pets that want like really playful pets. They want pets they can just play with all day and night. And so then you want to raise a pet that's super, super playful, so that you can sell that one to the dungeon lord at the highest price, basically. And there are all sorts of different ways you can raise your pets. You sometimes want ones that poop a lot. The poop is an integral part of this game. That's not a joke, it actually is, because that dungeon lord might be a farmer and they want a bunch of free manure. So you want an animal that's going to be like a machine gun, basically. And so there's all these different ways, but it's a really tough game. It's a pretty darn heavy game. It's a Vlaada Chvátil game. Made things like, Mage Knight, a whole bunch of other stuff. Also things like Codenames. Vlaada Chvátil is very, very versatile. And it's a tough game, but it's so much fun because everything in the game is thematically integrated into the game. All the mechanics you're doing, all the things you're going about are just so darn well integrated within the theme. It's just so much fun. I absolutely love it. This game is a banger. It's one of the first games we got. It was way too heavy at the time, but the theme got us through those kind of playing games that were way too heavy for us, and we still love it to this day. I absolutely love Dungeon Pets. I think it's one of the funnest, coolest games on the planet. Love Dungeon Pets. It's an absolute banger. Gonna put this on the floor right there. I'm gonna leave the loop right here so I don't have to hold it. Boom. The loop. Actually, I'm gonna leave them all up there. That's a way better idea. So we have the loop. I really, really like the loop. The loop is a cooperative game where you are going through time trying to find Dr. Foe and his various clones. And the game, I'm gonna hold it. And the game is going to have this kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 septagonal board. And it's got this cube tower here in the middle. You're gonna be dropping these kind of red crisis cubes into that cube tower. And they'll be going out into these different parts of time, because Dr. Foe is a time traveler and is going through different eras. So you have Dr. Foe, then you have Dr. Foe in like the future, Dr. Foe in like the Renaissance era, all these different time periods, and he's going around and putting out his clones everywhere. And then his clones are basically screwing stuff up. And you want to get those clones back to their origin area. So if he puts out a Renaissance clone, you have to try and get that clone back to the Renaissance area of the board. And that will then destroy that clone because, I don't know, time paradox stuff, I don't know what's going on. But nonetheless, it's really, really fun. and there's a whole bunch of objectives around the board that you're trying to complete. You're trying to complete a certain amount of objectives before the game is over. But if you ever get too many of those red bad cubes in that area, it'll create a vortex and it'll destroy that objective there, and then you can no longer do it. And if you ever get, I think, 3 vortex, if I remember correctly, you just lose the game. I really like the loop. If you watch my recent video where I talked about games that replaced other games, I mentioned that at least for right now, the loop has replaced Pandemic for me and a lot of other what we consider crisis management co-op games, because this game is all about crisis management. All this crazy stuff is happening and you just have to deal with it as it comes out. You're like, okay, I wanted to do this, but now this whole area over here is getting nuts, so I have to go over here and deal with that. I really like crisis management co-op games, and right now this is by far my favorite one. I really love the loop. I love the way it looks. There's a whole bunch of different stuff you can do in the game, and there's also apparently the expansion is really, really fun. I'm going to put this into the, it's between great and banger. And the only reason it's not higher, I'm putting a banger. But the reason why it's not super, super solid in the banger is mostly because I like this game a lot more than Mike does. This game is brutally hard. Really, really hard. We've never won this game, and we are not playing it on the highest difficulty. We're apparently just really bad at this game. But I played this game a whole bunch and we've never won it. I don't really mind that, but I think the difficulty of it turns Mike off a little bit. So I definitely like this game more than him. And now a lot of people really, really like to play the loop solo. And so I want to start trying to play it solo because I just like it more than Mike. And so I think I should just start playing it solo to kind of just play it because I want to be playing it. And so I really like the loop. I'm going to make it in the banger category. It might move up another category in a Dum Dum Fuego Fire because it's just so good and I love it so much. And I want to get the expansion because apparently the expansion is also really, really good. The loop is just so much fun. If you like crisis management co-op games, please try the loop. It's great. Okay. We got next. Okay, we got It's a Wonderful Kingdom. And we have It's a Wonderful World. They're both here. We'll talk about them separately, but it's interesting because they're both very similar games. So actually, let's talk about It's a Wonderful World first. This is the first one, and then we'll talk about It's a Wonderful Kingdom. So It's a Wonderful World, I also just played this recently. It's so good. This was my 6th favorite game. I'm going to tell you right now, it's Dum Dum Fuego Fire. This was my 6th favorite game when we did our top 100 somewhat recently, and I was blown away at how high this game climbed up my top 100 list. I was pretty sure it was going to be in there. I was not expecting it to be my top 10, but I absolutely love It's a Wonderful World. This is a drafting engine building game where you are going to be having these big tarot-sized cards, and you're going to be drafting them around the game. You start with 7 cards in hand, you take one, pass it, and everyone does that until everyone has 7 cards. And then you will take these cards and put them into construction, or you'll recycle them. When you put them into construction, they're going to need certain things on them to be built. So different colored cubes, essentially. There are different word names for them, like economy and population, all this kind of stuff. They're just colored cubes, basically. And so once you fill up that card's cost with these cubes, you then build that card. It'll go into your production area, and then a lot of times they will continually produce resources on top of usually giving you some points. And that's all it is. You're drafting these cards and you're building up this engine. But it just works so well. And one of my favorite things about it is when you're building out your production, you can just chuck cards out because each card will have one of the color cubes on them, and that's their recycle ability. And basically when you recycle them, you just get one of those cubes. And you can put that immediately on a card. And then when you build a card, it goes over to your production area. But one thing I love, where I think this game really, really sings, is when we're producing resources, we're all producing at the same time. And there are 5 different resources. There's gray, black, green, yellow, and blue. And when we're producing resources, you produce them in that order. So everyone first will produce their materials, which is the gray ones. So it goes, okay, everyone produce your materials. You look at your production line, all the things that have materials that produce, you'll get that many cubes. But the cool thing is you get to then immediately put those cubes onto cards you're building. And then if you finish a card that way, you get to immediately throw the cubes back in the discard pile, and then you get to take that card and put it in your production line. So it goes gray, black, green. Let's say we produce materials, the gray one, and then I finish a card that has green production on it. Well, we haven't produced green, so then we'll produce black, and then once we get to green, I get to use that card I just built like 25 seconds ago. And it makes it so much fun. It makes it so interesting, that engine building. And then on top of that, it's just a really good drafting game because some cards are pretty easy to put into play, get you pretty cheap resources when you produce them, but really aren't worth any points at all. And then certain ones take a lot of resources and a lot of really expensive resources. You're kind of like, ooh, am I gonna be able to do this? Is this gonna be something I can do? And that choice is really, really fun. And just as a pure drafting engine building game, it is, for me at least, nothing tops it. I think it's so much fun. This game is Dum Dum Fuego Fire. I absolutely adore it. It's so good. If you like drafting games, engine building games, please try this. And then they came out with a 2-player version of it called It's a Wonderful Kingdom. It's a Wonderful Kingdom works in very much the same way, where you're going to be building out an engine, you're going to be producing resources in the same way and in the same order, where you're producing this one, then this one, then this one. And if you build a card that hasn't produced yet, you then will get to produce that resource. All that kind of engine building stuff is pretty much the same, but this game is only for 2 players. So how do you deal with the draft? Well, you deal with the draft in my favorite personal mechanic usually, and that is I split, you choose. So on your turn, you are choosing what cards to put on your side of the kingdom and what side you're putting on your opponent's side of the kingdom, and then they get to choose. And so you then are doing that. You're doing I Split, You Choose. And I Split, You Choose is usually really, really good. And frankly, it is good in this game. I think the drafting in It's a Wonderful Kingdom is more interesting than the drafting in It's a Wonderful World. The reason why this one I'm gonna put at Great Game instead of all the way to Dum Dum Fuego Fire is because 2 real reasons. One, It's a Wonderful World already plays really good at 2. Like, it's not like a bad 2-player game. It's really good at 2. So like having a whole 2-player version of it kind of just doesn't really feel necessary to Mike and I personally. And in this game, there are a couple different modules you can play with, which is super cool, and I want to play with them more, and that might bump this one up to a banger category. But one thing we don't really like about this game is there are these calamity cards, and calamity cards are negative points. And so it does make the drafting interesting because you're like, look, I'm gonna put these cards down here that I know you want because I see you building a whole bunch of those yellow cards. So I'm gonna put 2 yellow cards that are really juicy, but I'm gonna throw this calamity card in there. So if you really want this, you're gonna have to take negative points at the end of the game. And some people, I'm sure, are going to absolutely love that part of the game. Mike and I just kind of don't, particularly Mike. He really hates the calamity cards. And so it's just, to us, it just doesn't feel necessary to have the calamity cards, and they kind of lessen our experience of the game to have them. Now, we have talked to people who have just said like, yeah, we don't really like it either, so we just don't play with them. We just put them back in the box and we just don't play with them. And they're like, the game works fine. So I really want to try it now without the calamity cards because we just don't really enjoy that part of the game. And if the drafting itself still works fine, I think we'll like this one more. But as it is with the calamity cards, we just don't love it. And so, well, we like it. It's just not as good as It's a Wonderful World, especially because It's a Wonderful World already plays good at 2. So it's kind of like, I don't know if we need a whole nother 2-player version of the game, but I still do like it and I want to explore it more. And it's good, but in the end, for the most part, it's still kind of like It's a Wonderful World, which we already really, really like. And so It's a Wonderful Kingdom is good stuff, but we like It's a Wonderful World more as of right now. Now we have Sonora. Sonora is an interesting game. I like Sonora. It is a really good game. It is a roll and write game, but the way you are rolling instead of a roll and write or a flip and write, this is a flick and write. This is a game where everyone has their own player board where you have different regions that you're working in, roll and write stuff, you're crossing off stuff, making paths, getting bonuses. This game has crazy bonuses. You're just bonus after bonus after bonus. It's really, really satisfying. If you like really combo-tastic, bonus-heavy roll and writes, Sonora is great. But there's this whole area right here, and this is kind of like a crokinole board. We call it a crokin, right? And this game, you are flicking discs into these different regions. And these different regions are the same regions on your player board. And so at the end, once everyone's done flicking, you look at your discs, and then basically, like the green player here has a green 5 and a green 1 in this area. That means they're going to use that green 5 and that green 1 in this region of their player board. So depending on what you're trying to do on your player board, you're trying to flick stuff into those regions so that you can use them. And it's really interesting. It's a really interesting way to go about doing the dice roll or the card flipping part of roll and writes, flip and fills, whatever you want to call them. It's a really interesting way to go about it. It's a very different way to go about it. And aside from that, it's just kind of a really combo-tastic roll and write kind of game. But it's got that dexterity element, which I think is really, really fun. Because you can knock people out of areas, and sometimes you get knocked into a whole different area, and you're like, I didn't want my 3-disc over there, but that's where it is now, so now I have to use it over here. It's really, really fun, really interesting way to go about that kind of game. And a game that I feel like flew under the radar, like pretty hardcore. Like, it came out and people were like, oh, this looks cool. And then I feel like no one ever talked about it again. And Sonora is really fun. If you like combo-tastic roll and writes, this game's a banger. Absolute banger. It's really, really good. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the banger category. It's on the line between great and banger, but I'm gonna put it in the banger category because I just think it's cool. I think it's a really cool way to go about it. I wish more people played it, so play it, butts. Okay, now we have Mandala Stones. Mandala Stones is a board and dice game, and it is an abstract strategy game with cool acrylic tiles. It doesn't play anything like Azul, but think of that kind of thing where it's very, very pretty, beautiful, very satisfying acrylic tiles. And this game is an abstract strategy game that's very, very tough and puzzly. Basically, you are getting these stones. There is this kind of main board here, and there are all these stones stacked up on that main board. And you have these artists around these kind of big black cylinders, these big columns, and you're basically on your turn to place one of those, and you're gonna grab the stones around that cylinder that match the symbol on the artist. And then you're gonna put them onto your player board here, and you have to put them on different spots on your player board. And here's what's interesting, is grabbing the tiles that way is very interesting because you have to, sometimes you're like, oh, I really, really need this color of tile, but I would only get one over here. Or I can go over here and place the artist here and get 3 tiles, but they're kind of not really colors that I need. So that part there is very interesting, but the really, really interesting part is placing them on your player board, because your player board has 4 different spaces where you can place these stones. And all 4 of those spots score differently. And so it's really, really interesting how you have to place them down. Because another thing you can do on your turn is you can choose to score them. And basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna score each of the scoring things, and then you're gonna remove the top tile on all of those scoring opportunities. But each one scores differently. So one might be like the one that is on the top is gonna be worth the most points. This one over here, the one that's on the bottom, is gonna be worth the most points. This one right here will be worth points depending on how many things are in that column. And you score them all different ways. So when you're drafting these tiles and placing them here, you're kind of like, oh man, no, I need this to be this certain height, and I need this to be this certain height, and I need this one to be da-da-da-da, and because when you score them, you can only score all of one color. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna score purple. So you take off all the purples off the top. And so you have to have these things in certain areas, and it just like melts your mind to try to like look at the way you're gonna draft them and look at the way you're gonna place them on your scoring, and it's really, really tough. And this is one of those games that, like, when we first played it, we were like, oh man, this is like not an Azul killer, but like this is an Azul competitor. Like this is like in that same realm of like very easy to teach, tough puzzle, beautiful, satisfying acrylic abstract strategy games. That's very appealing to seemingly everybody, and it just didn't do that well. It doesn't seem like it, at least. I don't really ever see anyone talk about it or playing it, and it certainly did not do as well as something like Azul. And it's kind of a shame because I like this like a lot more than Azul. We don't have Azul anymore, but we still have Mandala Stones. I really like Mandala Stones. That kind of tough puzzle, but super simple rules is super, super good in this game. I think it's a great game. We're putting a great category, just because abstract strategy is never gonna be like my total thing, but I really like this game, and I don't entirely know why it didn't do better than it did. And again, it's one of those games where I'm like, this, in my opinion, should have like competed with Azul or at least been in that same weight class, and it kind of just wasn't, which is unfortunate because I think it's a really, really good game. Mandala Stones, if you like abstract strategy games, particularly pretty ones with nice acrylic tiles, give Mandala Stones a try. It's really, really fun. Alrighty, the last one for this list. Oh my gosh, I forgot to mention the shelf on this one. This shelf was bought by Northwoods, Wisconsin Bing Bongs. Thank you for for buying the shelf during our last Kickstarter. We really appreciate it. Okay, so now we have Oceans. Oceans is the kind of next iteration of the game Evolution by North Star Games. So Evolution is a game about evolution, and you basically are getting different kinds of species, and you're putting different traits on those species, like a long neck, or horns, or making them a carnivore, or giving them pack hunting abilities, or a whole bunch of different stuff. And you're trying to eat the most food. And you are adapting your animals to essentially deal with everyone else, because everyone's kind of adapting at the same time. You're basically trying to make your species the best so that they can eat the most food. That's the whole plan. Eating food makes sense. That's how nature works. You're just trying to survive, eat food, pass on your genes. Oceans is the next. They had Evolution, then they had Evolution Climate, which added climate to it, which I thought was a lot better. And then they had Evolution Oceans, and this is a whole separate game. You can't play it with normal evolution. And this one takes place in the ocean, as you can see. And this game, for us at least, is significantly better than Evolution. I really liked Evolution. I really liked Evolution Climate. But Oceans, to us, blows them both out of the water. Because Oceans is just... it's more like the circle of life, basically. Because in Evolution, you can choose to, like, deal with your opponents. You can choose to attack them with, like, a carnivore and stuff. But in this game, it's very, very circular. Everything is one big circle, because so many of the traits that you have will deal with things on either side of that animal. So when you place a species down, and you can place a species as well, but you're going to put it on like the right or the left side of that species. And those species are adjacent to each other, because, and that matters because certain of the traits will be like, when the species to the right of this species feeds, this species gets a food, because they're kind of like a scavenger, essentially. They're kind of like, you know, you see like a shark and there's a bunch of little fish like cruising around the shark. They're just hoping to get a little bit of food the next time that shark feeds on something. So you can have those. They're kind of like little scavengers. And so the species to the right of that species matters. But the thing is, if that species is on the very right side of your row of species, then the species to the right of them might be the player's leftmost species, the next player. And so it really is this big old circle of everyone kind of like feeding off each other, and like all these like symbiotic relationships between you and your neighbors, or you and your other species. And the way you build stuff is just super interesting. And in my opinion, just makes it feel better than Evolution did. I really, really like it. And then on top of that, Oceans has the Deep. It has this big old deck of cards called the Deep. And these cards you can play with or you cannot play with. We always play with them. And these essentially are going to be more of these kinds of traits that you can put on the animal, but they're just like bonkers. They're all over the place. They are like super expensive and super apex predator, or super this or super that. They're all these like crazy cards that are like on steroids. And they really changed the game up a lot. And there's a huge deck of them. And so it's like this really interesting way to play the game, because you play your normal Evolution stuff, but then on top of that, you add this like big crazy deck that changes up the game a lot. And they just ran a Kickstarter somewhat recently for another expansion, which then gives like player powers. And that also made the game even more interesting. So we really, really like Oceans. I'm going to put it in the banger category. I really like it. We had a good shelf here, now that I think about it. A really good shelf. I really like Oceans a lot. I think Oceans is really, really good. And of like the kind of evolution games, this one is by far my favorite. We ended up getting rid of Evolution, Evolution Climate, kept Oceans because it's by far our favorite. And that is going to be the end of this list. It was a good list. We had a lot of really good games here. Yeah, again, I like pretty much all our games. That's why we have them. But nonetheless, this right here was our list. Let us know what games on here you liked. If you haven't played one of these games, let us know which game on here you'd like to play the most. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you later.
Thank you so much for watching that tier list video. Make sure to click the other tier list videos on the right side of your screen so you can check out more of our shelves, and let us know what you think about the games down in the comments below. We want to give a big shout out to our channel sponsors, Restoration Games, Lucky Duck Games, and Board Game Geek. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a good one.